I want to talk about a comedian I just discovered, but really more about comedy in general, in keeping with the theme that we're talking about the idea that the belief in God underlies so much of what we think and so much of what we feel. The German philosophy that I was talking about really culminates to some degree with Nietzsche, who points out that God is dead, and therefore the entire moral structure has fallen apart, and people just haven't accepted the fact that they have stopped believing in God. And I think he was absolutely right about this, that people don't believe even when they think they do. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this comedian, it always makes me laugh when a leftist gets angry at me and he says, "I've never even heard of you." And I always think, well, why is your ignorance my problem, And so here's a guy I had never heard of, but it turns out, of course, he was very famous. When I tweeted, "Gee, I really like this guy," everybody kind of climbed on me saying, "Oh, you should have heard about him. He was, Norma McDonald's favorite comedian." But he is really funny. His name is Brian Regan. And the thing that turned me on to him was this little clip that was on Twitter about art and abstract art.
How do you decide if art is any good? Who's in charge of that, Realistic art, you can tell because you can compare it to the real thing. Hey, there's a painting of a bowl of fruit. Hey, there's a real bowl of fruit. That's a great painting. I look just like a bowl of fruit. Everybody agrees and you move on. Man, that guy can paint some fruit. That looks just like an apple. But abstract art, who decides if that's good or not? Like Picasso, he puts two eyes on the same side of the face. And if I were judging, I'd have to take points off. Pablo, look around. Does anyone have two eyes on the same side of the face? No, hence the low score. And people say, well, that's just it, Brian. He sees things differently. Well, then he shouldn't be painting.
I don't want to get into philosophy kills humor and all this stuff, but I've talked about the fact that I believe that the death of God is one of the reasons we get into abstract art, because we stop trusting our internal lives because they have no basis in anything. And so we start thinking that everything we see, including ourselves, is an illusion. And we start to talk about how things are just shapes, just shadows, just light. There's actually no there. So he's seeing something really funny. But when I tweeted that and I put it out, a lot of people came back and said, "Oh, yes, and he's clean," which I hadn't even actually noticed. He doesn't curse, and he doesn't talk a lot about sex. Now, I'm going to be just dead honest here. It doesn't bother me when people curse unless I start to feel that they're cursing instead of being funny, because it makes people laugh when you curse, but it doesn't always mean you're funny. I have heard this I think it's a Seinfeld quote. He says, if they laugh when you curse, you might be funny, but if you don't curse and they laugh, you are funny. And I think that really is the point. But I have noticed something else, which is that comedians now do entire routines about small sexual ideas and parts of your body, so that they talk incessantly about parts of your body that most of us don't go around talking about because it's impolite, right? And that's supposed to be funny. I think a lot of this came from Robin Williams, who did one hilarious HBO special where he did this very, very graphic sexual stuff, and it was funny. And then everybody just started, it's just this petty stuff. He listened to Pete Davidson, and that's all it is like this stuff, little stuff about his body. And it makes me remember Eddie Murphy, who once did an entire routine about going to the bathroom because he said it was the first comedy routine he ever did when he was a little boy, because all he knew about was going to the bathroom. And I actually think this is a sign of mental illness. I think that the comedians who cannot say anything without cursing, and I'm talking about great comedians. I know Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle, they curse constantly. Bill Burr, who's one of my favorites. Louis C.K. is a really interesting example, because when he gets into this blue stuff, when he gets into this petty sexual stuff, he's not that funny. When he does observational comedy like Brian Regan is doing, he is he's one of the funniest men alive. And I think that this is a sign of mental illness, that these guys cannot express themselves cleanly and clearly and still get laughs. And I think the reason is they're observing less and less. And the reason for that goes back to what we've been talking about, is that as you begin to believe that the world as we perceive it, including the moral world and the emotional world as we perceive it, is just an illusion, is subjective. Well, you think a waterfall is glorious, but that's just in the eyes of the beholder. And that's not true. A waterfall is actually glorious if you're a human being who is healthy and sane. But when you lose faith in that, when you lose faith and the fact that you were made by a God who meant you to see the things that you see, you're not seeing what he sees. You're not seeing things as they are, but you are seeing what human beings see, including the beautiful things, including the good things and the bad things. All those are legitimate observations because you're not God, but there is a God, and he means you to see what you see. When you lose faith in that, all you have is less and less that you can depend on, namely your body. So your body is pain and pleasure, and so all you can make jokes about are pleasure and pain. But here is a guy who can make jokes about all kinds of things that have to do with the human experience of being in the world. Here is another little bit that he did that actually bowled me over the first time I saw it on the Walkie Talkie. It's cut 15.
Inventions intrigue me. I was reading about the Walkie Talkie, and I read it was a military invention. That surprised me, because usually military stuff has strong names, Apache helicopter, Tomahawk missile. Walkie Talkie? How did that slip through the system? It's a general talking to some guy. What do you have there, soldier? Well, it's a new communication device. It's untethered, which will enable the troops to speak effectively when they're in the field. What's it called? Walkie Talkie. Look, I'm walking and I'm talking. Now you walkie and talkie, General. I'm walkie and talkie. Are you walkie and talkie? I like it, soldier. What's this explosive device? The whammy kablammy. And this is the Rudy Tooty aim and shoot.
You can see why Norm Macdonald liked him, It's like just completely out of left field, but still, the minute he says it, you get it. It's funny. The minute he says, the military has these strong names for things, but walkie-talkie, you know what the routine is going. There's something healthy about this guy. And I don't know. Obviously, all comedians are crazy. My father was a comedian. All comedians are out of their minds. So I'm not saying that he's mentally healthy at all. I'm saying that his vision is somehow shaped, and I don't know anything about him. I purposely didn't look him up, except, briefly to see where his career had been. But I didn't look in very deeply into him because I didn't want to know anything about him, because I'm not making a point about him. I'm making a point about the society out of which he comes. He clearly comes from a society that was held together and had ideas that were more in keeping with reality than the ideas that the rest of people are talking about. And when you look at comedians, and we this is a very irritating thing for me, is that we all are thrilled when Dave Chappelle goes after cancel culture, or when Chris Rock does, or something like that. But really, we should be looking at an entire way of thinking that is not being thought, because cancel culture comes out of this idea that words are violence and behavior is violence, because everything that shapes you against your will is violence. And so if I say that you say you're a girl and I say, look, you're obviously not, that is violence against you, but it's not violence to cut pieces off you because because those were imposed upon you too. Your body was imposed upon you too. And all of this wouldn't be true if you believed in a good God, right? A good God doesn't impose things on you. He doesn't do things to you. He creates a world in which things happen to you that may be bad, which is different, but that preserves your freedom. But he doesn't sit there and go, I'm going to strike you with polio. That's not the way God actually behaves. And so that it has affected our entire culture. And I understand why people suddenly say, I don't want to listen to anything that's got cursing in it. I don't want to listen to anything that's going to be this. I don't want to even watch a modern movie. But that actually doesn't help you, because you're still in this world where your president is coming out and saying it's wrong that parents won't butcher their children. And that's the strongest, most powerful man in the world saying something that is evil. It's actually evil. And again, I think Joe Biden is venal. I think he's corrupt. I think he's a bad person, but I don't think he's evil. I mean, you've seen evil. There's a body count to evil. There's something genuinely horrific about it, but he's doing evil. He's saying evil things. And that is because this logic has taken over the world, and it affects everything. And it does affect our comedy, even the comedy of people I like. I mean, I love this guy, Bill Burr. slur, but he can't express himself without becoming foul either. And when I say foul, I don't just mean cursing. I mean an entire way of looking at the body as if it doesn't matter, as if there were no spirit in it. But this guy was just absolutely refreshing. I watched an entire show of his. I haven't watched more, but I look forward to watching more because he's just genuinely funny. So I don't mean to make too much philosophy out of one comedian, but it just struck me when I saw him that he was different in kind. He was different in kind, not just in quality, though the quality is also better. I know you're dying for more great content like this, but you don't have to die. Just like and subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.